Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are undertaking a mission that goes right to the heart of what it means to be conscious.
It really does.
We're tackling some of the most, truly radical claims from advanced contemplative practice. We're talking of the intentional cessation of consciousness.
The end of experience on purpose.
Exactly. And the complete deconstruction of the self. But, and this is the key, we're doing it with a 21st century toolkit.
That's right. Our sources today, they're really trying to bridge millennia of reported inner experience, mostly from deep Buddhist meditative traditions,
Right.
with the very latest in cognitive neuroscience. We're going to be using a framework known as predictive processing, or PP for short.
And the goal here is to provide a kind of computational explanation for something that honestly sounds impossible.
It does, absolutely.
How can giving up your sense of you, giving up the feeling of the world, how can that possibly lead not to confusion or psychosis, but to
Well,
profound, irreversible freedom?
liberation, that's the claim.
It's the ultimate paradox, isn't it? Everything in our biology, our ego, it tells us to hold on tighter, define ourselves more, fight harder to get rid of uncertainty.
Right, control the environment.
But these traditions, they claim the exact opposite. That the path to, ultimate well-being requires letting go completely.
Moving through these incredible states of bliss and
Go.
peace, and finally arriving at a state that's described as, well, total non-existence.
So our deep dive today is to try and understand the computational roadmap for this journey. We're going to look at how these advanced states like jhana, the realization of emptiness, and that final state, cessation attainment.
Nirodha Samapatti.
Right. How all of that maps onto the brain's fundamental operating system, the predictive one.
Exactly. And to understand how the self can be deconstructed, we really have to start with why it was built in the first place.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's unpack this core idea of predictive processing.
So the brain's most fundamental goal isn't to create a perfect, mirror image of reality.
It's not a camera.
Not at all. Its goal is survival. And computationally, what this means is that its primary function is long-term prediction error minimization.
Okay, prediction error minimization. So the brain is constantly acting like a superpowered thermostat, trying to keep everything stable.
That's a perfect analogy.
It's predicting what's coming next, and if the prediction is wrong, that's an error, and the system just works like crazy to fix it.
Precisely. That's the engine of all cognition, all action. Mathematically, this is the same as reducing uncertainty and entropy. If your brain can accurately guess where food will be or where danger might pop up,
It keeps you alive.
it ensures the organism's enduring existence. If the system is constantly surprised, it dies. It's that simple.
And this isn't just happening on one level, right? This is hierarchical, which I guess explains the difference between, say, stubbing your toe and having an existential crisis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The process is extended deep into a hierarchical structure. Think of it like a massive corporation. The lower levels are the factory floor. They're encoding concrete, raw sensory data, the pressure on your feet, the light hitting your retina, the immediate signals.
Stuff that's happening right now.
Yes. But the higher levels, they're the executive suite. They encode abstract, conceptual information, your thoughts, your long-term plans, your identity, the whole story of your life.
So the executives are making these high-level predictions about what the factory floor should be reporting back.
Perfectly put. That's the loop.
So if the executive suite predicts, I should be happy on my birthday, and the factory floor reports back, actually my stomach hurts and I'm tired, that creates an error.
A big one.
Yeah.
And the system has to adjust. And because those higher levels are so abstract, they don't just deal in raw sensation, they deal in meaning and concepts.
Which means our experience of reality isn't really reality itself.
It isn't. It's a constantly refined internal generative model. It's based entirely on past experience, and it's continuously tested against the outside world. We are, in a very real sense, living inside an incredibly effective, but ultimately constructed simulation.
But that simulation needs a main character, right? It needs an agent to make sense of all the actions it takes. If the brain is predicting, I am going to reach for that cup, it has to have a model of who is doing the reaching.
And that is the constructed self. It's not some solid entity sitting behind your eyes. It's an inference the brain generates to predict the outcomes of its own actions.
So this is a core part of what you call active inference.
It is. To function, the system has to represent itself as an intentional agent, the self model. The self, therefore, is just the highest level predictive model the brain runs about its own behavior in the world.
Okay, I think I'm following. And to be a really effective agent, to plan a career or build a house, that self model can't just exist in the present moment. It needs, what did you call it? Temporal depth.
Crucially, yes. This is the computational asset that really distinguishes complex human cognition. Temporal depth is the ability to project into the distant past and the distant future.
It's what lets us create these complex, what were they, counterfactual trees?
Counterfactual trees, that's right. It's the ability to imagine what is not currently happening. We can remember a pain from last week and then predict the possibility of a similar pain next year.
Wait a minute. If this ability to plan and project, if this is our greatest evolutionary advantage, how can these contemplative traditions possibly argue that it's also the main source of our suffering? That seems like a huge contradiction.
It's the cost of complexity. It's the flip side of the coin. While temporal depth lets us build civilizations, it also lets us suffer over things that haven't happened yet, or things that are completely over.
Rumination, anxiety.
Exactly. When you're ruminating over an argument from 3 months ago, or you're anxiously running through a million scenarios for a job interview next week, computationally, you are generating high-level prediction errors based on what is not happening in the present moment.
Wow, so we're basically running these incredibly complex, painful simulations based on our past conditioning.
That's it. So suffering isn't just, biological discomfort like hunger. It's the rigid belief that the current error, the unpleasant feeling, must be resisted or permanently fixed, all based on some abstract future prediction of happiness.
And it's a prediction that's always out of reach.
Always. Suffering, from this viewpoint, is the system's computational resistance to what it perceives as disorder. It's that tenacious craving for a perfect future state that can never really arrive because the world is just inherently uncertain.
The more rigid my plan for the future, the more likely I am to suffer when reality doesn't match it.
The greater the potential for prediction error, and
Can I
thus suffering. Yes.
Okay, before we go further, there's a technical bit we need to clarify. You mentioned the brain attaching importance to signals. This feels key to understanding meditation, right? We need to talk about precision weighting.
Absolutely. Precision is it's the level of confidence or perceived reliability the brain assigns to a particular prediction error or sensory input.
So if I believe my alarm clock is 100% reliable, I assign high precision to the prediction error when it fails to go off.
Exactly. And that feeling of shock and anger is the high precision error signal. But if I just sort of hope it rings, the precision is low. And I'm not that surprised when it doesn't.
How does that play out in, say, everyday anxiety?
Think about constantly checking your phone. If you send a really important email, you assign very high precision to the prediction error of no reply yet.
Right.
That feeling of tension, that anxiety, is the system allocating maximum attention and computational resources to resolving that specific error. It keeps checking the input, the phone screen, because it believes the feedback signal, the reply, is highly important or highly precise.
So when you worry, you are literally upweighting the precision of a negative future prediction. You're telling your brain, this is real. Pay attention to this danger.
You've got it. That's the mechanism.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So if suffering is tied to these high-precision, temporally thick, abstract predictions, then the contemplative path must be about systematically downgrading that precision.
And pruning those complex future narratives.
Yes. So that brings us to the roadmap, deconstructing the hierarchy.
That's the goal. If the problem is a self-model that's too rigid, too dependent on the past, and projecting way too much into the future, meditation acts as the counter-program. It's a purposeful process of deconstruction and pruning.
It's so fascinating to think of meditation not as clearing the mind, which is what you always hear, but as this highly refined process of cognitive subtraction.
Precisely. It's not about adding anything. We're reducing abstraction. We're gently trimming away the habitual, conceptualization of our experiences. When we move from thinking about the past to just focusing on the breath,
You're literally pruning the counterfactual tree.
you're starving those abstract layers. You're systematically directing attention from the executive suite down to the raw data on the factory floor. You reduce the brain's reliance on past-driven predictions, and in doing so, you enhance cognitive flexibility.
Okay, let's walk through this roadmap. The traditions identify, 4 clear layers of self that need to be deconstructed, and we start with the most abstract one, the narrative self.
The narrative self. This is the self that's created in language. It's the protagonist of your life story. It's the I who was embarrassed 10 years ago and the I who's planning to retire in 20 years.
The storyteller.
The storyteller. And our meditative training begins by targeting this layer, usually through focused attention practice.
But how does just focusing on your breath reduce this whole life story?
By repeatedly pulling attention back to the present moment, you're starving those high-level abstract processes. You're reducing the temporal depth.
Ah,
When you are truly one-pointedly focused on the subtle feeling of air moving in and out of your nostrils, you cannot, at the same time, be lost in the grand narrative of your past or future. The cognitive resources are just redirected elsewhere.
so if you do that over and over, you weaken the habit.
You weaken the habitual loop of mind wandering. The narrative still exists, it's still there, but the system ceases to automatically identify with it.
But even when I'm focused, the self still feels incredibly real, like right here. Where does that more immediate feeling of me live?
That takes us down a layer to the embodied or experiencing self. This is the sense of agency and physical presence in the here and now.
Mm.
It's anchored not in stories, but in the constant flow of raw sensory data and interoceptive systems.
Heart rate, gut feelings, posture, breathing.
All of it. The raw biological data stream.
So this is where practices like the body scan come in, right? We're drilling down past the story to the raw feeling of being.
Yes. And changes to the self model, they require more profound, prolonged attention. This is the kind of work you typically see on intensive meditation retreats. The body scan, for instance, isn't really about relaxation.
Yeah.
It's about experiencing the body as a constantly changing flow of energy and sensation, rather than a solid, static object that is mine. By observing sensations without preference, not grasping at the pleasant ones, not pushing away the unpleasant ones, you start to dismantle the predictive model of the body as being fixed or belonging to you.
This is a huge step. And it leads us to the third, and I think arguably the most fascinating layer, the witness or pure consciousness.
Yeah.
This shift often happens when people move from focused attention to, what's it called, open monitoring.
Open monitoring, or OM. And this is where the computational shift becomes really dramatic. In focused attention, or FA, we assign high precision to one object, like the breath, to ignore distractions.
Right, the breath is the important signal.
In OM, the goal flips. We treat all arising signals, thoughts, emotions, body sensations, sounds, we treat them all non-preferentially. We assign them equal and relatively low precision.
So wait, instead of fighting a distracting thought, you're essentially telling the brain this prediction is irrelevant no matter what it's about.
Exactly. The brain throws up a prediction, a thought, say, a worry about money. But because you've trained the system not to assign high precision to that thought, the system doesn't commit resources to confirming it or fighting it.
It's just seen, and then it goes.
It's seen, it's noted, and it passes. This is the process of de-reification. You reduce the subjective realness, or the belief in distracting thoughts. The thought is seen for what it is, a transient mental event, a projection, not a concrete reality you have to engage with.
And this is the birth of the witness.
The emergence of the witness, the capacity to observe experience without getting stuck to the content of that experience.
But if the witness is observing, that still implies a subtle duality, doesn't it? There's an observer, and then there's the thing being observed. How do you deconstruct that final boundary? That has to be non-dual awareness.
ND, yes. This is the deepest deconstruction before the content drops out entirely. It's the collapse of that subject-object dichotomy. The system lets go of the subtle background assumption that there's an observer and an observed.
But if the brain operates on this continuous loop of active inference, predicting the future outcomes of its own agency, how can that sense of agency, the observer, just disappear?
Because active inference relies on a future-oriented, intentional self-model. Conditions necessary for generating a continuous, separate, intentional observer. They just vanish.
The self-model can't find its footing.
It can't. There's only process without a designated experiencer of the process. And this is what sets the stage for the most radical states, where even the process itself can temporarily vanish.
So we've arrived at the frontier of consciousness. Let's start with this conceptual state of nothingness, or shunyata, emptiness.
Right.
This is so often confused with nihilism, or, that nothing matters. But this computational framework gives it a much more subtle and honestly a more liberating definition.
It does. Nothingness isn't about nothing existing. It's the experiential understanding that the personal self and all objects of experience are, in fact, mental fabrications.
They're empty.
They are empty of inherent substantial existence. Not empty in the sense of being gone, but empty of being an eternal, separate, fixed thing. It's the deep realization of groundlessness and total interdependence.
Okay, so how does predictive processing model that? It's a huge shift in understanding.
The realization of emptiness can be construed as reducing the high-level intrinsic precision over your prior beliefs. When we realize the truth of emptiness, we recognize that all our perceptions, our categories, our identities, including that rigid concept of me, are constructed.
They're not real in an ultimate sense.
They're approximate domain-relative representations. They're useful, but they're never ultimate, fixed truths.
I can sort of relate to this. Like when you're in a heated political argument, your rigid belief in your own viewpoint, that's high precision.
Extremely high precision.
Emptiness then would be realizing that viewpoint is just a temporary constructed model, not the absolute truth.
Exactly. The wise mind, the one informed by emptiness, is characterized by an intrinsically motivated low belief precision. It's just less convinced by any single story or goal or identity.
Which allows for more flexibility.
It allows the system to remain flexibly open to revising its beliefs based on new data. It prevents that dogmatic lock-in that happens when the mind reifies its own models as ultimate truths. This is what reduces that intellectual clinging to views.
Okay, but this is still a state of consciousness, right? Consciousness understanding something profound. Now we have to move to the state that almost defies definition. Nothingness. Cessation attainment. Nirodha Samapatti.
The cut.
The cut in the stream of consciousness where the process itself just stops.
This is really the peak experience of the deconstructive path. It's the intentional failure of the reality model. And the phenomenology, the reported experience, is just extraordinary.
It's not described as sleep, right? It's something else entirely.
Not at all. It's compared to general anesthesia. The meditator's body remains still, maybe for hours, but the light of awareness is completely, utterly extinguished.
And the most incredible part of the reports is the complete absence of time perception.
Absolutely. Whether the cessation lasts for a second, an hour, or in some very rare advanced cases, for multiple days, it is experienced subjectively as a blip, a single moment.
So there's zero perception of time passing.
None whatsoever. The meditator sets an intention before entering the state, and the body will re-emerge at that designated time, yet internally for the experiencer, no time has passed. This is the real difference between no-thingness and nothingness. One is the realization of the empty nature of all the content in your mind.
And the other is the total temporary shutdown of the mechanism that generates content in the first place.
Precisely.
Now, for the skeptic listening, this has to sound like folklore. But we actually have neurophysiological studies of expert meditators who can intentionally induce this. What's the evidence that the mind is genuinely turning itself off?
The data is really compelling, mainly because the changes are so acute and so widespread across the brain. When researchers monitor these practitioners, they see two really dramatic neurophysiological markers. First, a strong desynchronization.
What does that mean?
It means a decorrelation of neural activity across the entire brain. The various regions just stop talking to each other in a coherent way.
That sounds like a complete loss of the unity of experience.
It is. And the second marker is a sudden, remarkable drop in alpha power and synchronization. Alpha waves are what we usually associate with the resting, but awake, conscious mind.
So a collapse in alpha power is significant.
It's huge. It suggests a state that's even beyond deep non-REM sleep, which usually retains some residual activity. It really suggests a system-wide failure to bind all the sensory streams together.
Okay, let's focus on the mechanism. You called this Bayesian unbinding. How does systematically deconstructing the reality model lead to what is essentially a system crash?
Think of the brain's generative model as this colossal, incredibly complex opera that's run simultaneously across thousands of interconnected computers.
Okay, I like that.
Every prediction relies on thousands of other predictions, and the self is the conductor, making sure everything stays in tune and synchronized.
Right.
Now, throughout years of meditation, we are systematically introducing skepticism, low precision, to the highest level systems, to the conductor. We're telling the system, your story, your narrative self, it's unreliable. Your feeling of being a solid body, that's unreliable. The very idea of you as an observer, also unreliable.
So we're undermining the conductor's authority at every level.
Exactly. And the system, which is always trying to reduce prediction error, it keeps revising its model, trying to find a stable ground. But at the cessation level, the deconstruction is so deep, the skepticism so profound, that the system transiently fails to generate a single, unified, coherent reality model.
It's like the conductor faced with the groundlessness of his own existence, just stops conducting.
That's a perfect image for it. And all the computational processes, the sensory binding, the flow of phenomenal experience, they all simultaneously fall out of sync. This is the Bayesian unbinding, a transient collapse of the predictive loop that generates the self and awareness.
So the mind doesn't just go quiet. It literally ceases the function that creates the feeling of consciousness itself. It's a temporary, intentional blackout.
And that intentionality is absolutely key. The collapse isn't random or pathological. It's the inevitable, transient result of the system running this deconstructive program to its absolute limit.
And in doing so, it proves something to itself.
It proves experientially that nothing, not even consciousness, is a fixed, permanent entity that can be held on to.
Wow. Okay, so we started this with the computational definition of suffering as the intention to minimize prediction error. At its core, suffering is grasping.
The resistance to what is, and the craving for a predicted better state.
Yeah. We've seen how meditation deconstructs all this. Now let's connect the dots. How does this whole process deliver that feeling of irreversible freedom?
The transformative leap is achieved by releasing the computational effort of fighting uncertainty. We can actually quantify this release by looking at the progression through these high-level contemplative states, which reflect the letting go of deeper and deeper forms of prediction.
Okay, so let's start with the bliss states, the jhanas. They're often described as this rapturous absorption. If the goal is detachment, why do these states feel so intensely pleasurable?
Because the jhana states are they're temporary, delightful optimizations of the current reality model. You achieve this state by selectively releasing precision over deeper, more distracting abstract processes like your thoughts and worries, while you simultaneously upweight precision for pleasant mental states and sensations.
So in the first jhana, for example.
In the first jhana, you release all predictions related to potential discomfort or mental agitation, which results in this intense happiness and focus. It's like the brain has found a brief, perfect equilibrium, and the resulting feeling of coherence is interpreted by the system as bliss.
So bliss is still a high-precision state. It's just precision focused entirely on positive internal coherence.
Exactly.
But that's not the end goal.
It's not. The problem is you can start grasping for bliss. If the system clings to the pleasure of jhana, it's still generating prediction errors when the bliss inevitably fades, which leads to the next stage, peace or equanimity.
And this correlates with that realization of emptiness and the practice of open monitoring.
Exactly. Peace is achieved when the system finally ceases resisting uncertainty and craving certainty. The nervous system maintains equanimity because the meditator now recognizes that both the unpleasantness and the craving are just internal computational events.
They're prediction errors being generated.
And through de-reification, the meditator no longer identifies with the error. They see their viewpoints, their desires, as just past conditionings being projected onto the present. The system is no longer compelled to go into fight, flight, or freeze just because the present moment deviates from a prediction.
The system stops fighting its own output. And this is what leads to the ultimate payoff, freedom, which arises from that cessation experience.
The profound realization of freedom is that the system frees itself by recognizing it doesn't need a self to operate. The ultimate release comes from recognizing that nothing, not the self, not the external world, not even the feeling of being conscious, can be fundamentally held onto.
It's been proven experientially.
The system has proven to itself that its highest level model, awareness itself, can be successfully terminated and restarted.
And this is where the transformation becomes irreversible. How can one transient experience of nothingness fundamentally change the trait of the meditator afterwards? How does the system truly get a software reset?
That is the claim. It's often described as a kind of ontological shift. The cessation experience allows for novel insights about how the mind is constructed that are just impossible to grasp when you're identified with the narrative, embodied, or even the witness self.
It's like finally seeing the source code for the first time.
That's a great way to put it. You realize the illusory nature of your identity, not just intellectually, but at a foundational, computational level.
And what's the result of this software reset?
The system emerges with what is often called a new stream of consciousness. Not necessarily a constantly blissful one, but one where that habitual, rigid, suffering self-model is permanently revised. The enduring trait change is a massive reduction in clinging and grasping.
So the person becomes radically more flexible.
More flexible, less agitated, and no longer defaults to identifying with those heavy, temporally thick abstractions. They still live in the world, they still make plans, but the friction, the suffering caused by that rigid adherence to the plans is vastly reduced. They know, fundamentally, that they are not their thoughts or their predictions.
This entire journey from, deep anxiety to liberation is punctuated by these moments of sudden, profound realization, the aha moments. Insight.
Right.
This isn't just a happy thought, is it? It's a critical mechanism for transformation. Let's look at how neuroscience models the mechanics of this eureka heuristic.
Insight is the mechanism that ensures the transformation actually sticks. It functions as a kind of metacognitive heuristic for evaluating a new idea. It captures your attention, and it elicits this intuitive confidence that permits fast action under uncertainty.
So if an idea feels right, if you have that aha moment, you commit to the new model really quickly.
Very quickly.
So what is it that makes a new idea feel right, even if it completely contradicts years of previous belief?
It's a two-part computational process, which active inference explains perfectly. Step one is the content. There's an implicit restructuring, what's called a Bayesian reduction. This just means the brain finds a simpler, more elegant model to explain the data.
And this produces a prediction error?
A higher-order prediction error. The content of the insight, like when you suddenly realize the answer to a riddle.
And step two is the feeling of it being true.
Precisely. That feeling of intuitive confidence, the pleasure, the sudden capture of attention, that is the dopaminergic precision weighting of that prediction error. Dopamine floods the system, basically telling the brain, hey, this new model is highly reliable, trust it. Assign very high precision to it right now.
And that feeling is what locks the insight in as a new working truth?
It is.
That distinction between the content and the feeling is crucial, especially in meditation, because contemplative insight isn't about solving a physics problem, is it?
No, not at all. That's the core difference. A content insight is discovering a fact
Right.
realizing 2 + 2 = 4. Contemplative insight is about discovering a process. It's realizing how the mind constructs the self, how it assigns truth to the idea that 2 + 2 = 4, and how it fabricates the entire reality model. It's the direct experiential discovery of the mind's own mechanism.
But if that feeling of truthiness is just a dopamine signal, that must mean the mechanism is fallible. We can trick ourselves into believing things are profoundly true when they're actually mundane or even false.
And that is the significant danger of the insight heuristic. Researchers have successfully elicited false insights in people just by manipulating their inferential hardware. You can make people experience profound certainty about a weak or totally incorrect conclusion.
Wow.
It really highlights that the subjective feeling of realization is not by itself a guarantee of veridicality, of truth.
And this ties directly into why certain altered states are both so popular for and so cautioned against in generating insight.
Absolutely. Substances like psychedelics or even just deep sleep deprivation can severely alter that precision weighting process. They can induce an epiphany-like state, flooding the system with that dopamine-driven precision.
Which causes otherwise mundane ideas to feel profoundly true.
It creates a false inference of veridicality, truthiness. The feeling of aha is overwhelming. But the cognitive restructuring, the Bayesian reduction, might be weak or completely incorrect. The kind of high-level insight we're talking about today requires a sober, systematic deconstruction to verify the truth of the process, not just the emotional rush of a revelation.
Okay, pulling back now. If these practices allow us to access and even restructure the mind's core operating system, what are the implications for human awareness on a larger scale? Is this some form of accelerated evolution?
I think you could argue that. Contemplative practices are, in effect, speeding up an ongoing evolutionary process, turning the lens of the mind back toward the system itself. This increases self-awareness, and I don't mean neurotic self-consciousness, but a high-fidelity awareness of how the system works.
Where the inputs come from, how the errors get generated.
It's like gaining operational transparency into the very thing that's running our lives.
And that increased self-awareness creates systems, people that are fundamentally more flexible.
More flexible, more contextually sensitive, and ultimately more generally intelligent. The understanding that the self and the world are provisional, relative representations rather than rigid truths, it promotes a flexible, open attitude toward whatever is unfolding. We move toward higher complexity and hopefully collective wisdom.
So after all this, after this highly technical computational dive into consciousness, what does this mean for you, the listener, navigating the daily push and pull of prediction error? We've covered ground from deep anxiety to total cessation. I think the core insight is that the deepest freedom isn't found by changing your external reality. It's found by realizing the constructed nature and the groundlessness, the shunyata of your internal reality model.
And when the system finally realizes that suffering is just the subjective experience of clinging to a fixed view, the systematic deconstruction of the self from the narrative all the way down to that moment of cessation,
Yeah.
it allows for an incredibly powerful system reset.
And that ultimate transient collapse of consciousness. It reduces the habitual, tenacious, effortful grasp that defines so much of our suffering.
It does.
And the paradoxical truth here is that the experience of nothingness ultimately reveals not separation, but total interdependence. If the world, the self, the other, if they're all seen to be groundless, provisional models, what is left but our total embeddedness in our lives?
Right.
The cessation of consciousness reveals there is literally nowhere to hide from the totality of experience. You are entirely, irreversibly present.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought, building on this idea of provisional belief. If all our views, including our deepest beliefs about self-identity and time, are computationally constructed and therefore empty of inherent truth,
Where does that leave your most rigid, unexamined assumptions today? What prediction are you currently assigning such high precision to that it's causing you unnecessary suffering? That is the computational territory we will continue to explore.